990 KWAM Talk Radio, and this is the Unleashed Voice for the LGBTQ community, where we're talking about empowerment, education, and enhancement. We're having a little technical difficulty right here. We're going to bring on our next guest, and my son Davian is going to introduce him.
I have a young man who is a scholar, a preacher, prolific writer, a social activist. He's a husband, he's a father, the senior pastor of Abyssinia Baptist Church here in Memphis, Tennessee. He's a graduate of the great, in the words of my grandmother, Lemurian Aaron College. He's a graduate of Memphis Theological Seminary. He's getting his PhD in rhetoric and communication from the U of M, the old Memphis State. He's a adjunct instructor of contemporary theology at Rose College, as well as religion and humanities. And he's a brother of mine. I want to bring in the good Dr. Pastor Earle Fisher.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. In the words of the sister from the Help, after you read that, I feel like I's smart, I's kind, and I's important. Good to be here with you and Mama Clemens.
Yeah. Oh no!
Oh
no!
Sister G,
yeah,
Sister G.
Yeah. Oh, no. Sister G. We don't play that one.
Mother Dearest.
Yeah, she threatened me. I call her Mother Dearest. She threatened me.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, no. We're gonna jump into this. I want to thank you publicly for coming on our show. Many have labeled our show as the Leopard Show.
The Leopard Show.
The Leopard Show, and I have lost many friends because of the show.
Really?
I've lost friends because of the stance I've taken in my life recently about me coming out my closet that I was hid in the back. I could be me now. Mm-hmm. And so I've lost friends. I lost my preacher friends. I'm gonna talk bad about the black church. My friends in the black church. I lost my friend from Memphis Theological Seminary. Some of my friends from Lemurian Aaron, but you've been the same thus far, and I hope we can stay that way. And I thank you for coming on our show.
And thank you for having me. And it gives me an opportunity. Very rarely, as a heterosexual brother, do I find myself in a space where I am the sexual orientation minority. So
John is too.
Yeah, I know, but it's 2 out of 6. And also, I heard y'all in the last segment you were talking about, why do people have to come out? And I was thinking about even when I was the supervisor of your parish practicum project. At the time, I didn't know about the sexual orientation.
Because I was lying to you because I wasn't confident about who I was, and I didn't feel I could tell you who I really was.
Well, I was saying that to say it didn't make a difference to me then, don't make a difference to me now, that, hopefully people could build a bond that's bigger than who they, laying in the bed with and that sort of stuff.
You'd be surprised, these country jokers. But I thank you, though, for saying that.
No doubt. Well, you need to thank me for giving you a passing grade in that thing.
I do thank you for that, too. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into it. What happened in Baltimore, Maryland this past week?
Yeah, for our listeners, we're going to talk a little bit about Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray was a 25-year-old African-American man who was taken into custody on April 12, 2015 by the Baltimore Police Department for possessing what was alleged as a switchblade. While being transported in a police van, Mr. Gray fell into a coma of some type and was taken to the trauma center, where it was later discovered that he had injuries to his spine. And as a result of those injuries, Mr. Gray died on April 2015. So that's what has brought us to where we are today. And we solicited Pastor, should I call you Pastor Earle? Just Earle.
Yeah.
To come on our radio show to help us educate our listeners and to talk about the state of America, the state of Black America, all Black Lives Matter, do all lives matter, and just in general what's going on, as Marvin Gaye says. So anytime you want to dive in, feel free.
Well, I dive in right now. So Marvin Gaye said what's going on.
Yeah.
And Curtis Mayfield said Freddie's dead.
Oh,
that's what I said.
Yeah.
And in some of the conversations that I've been having with people about the subject matter, when what is called now Baltimore uprising really kicked off more nationally in the public media, it was around the riots that were taking place, specifically around the places that were being burned. And all I kept saying to people, and I put this on my Facebook page and Twitter page and stuff like this, I'll explain why people are rioting, if people explained to me why there was a funeral the day before.
Right.
So I'm glad that you started us having a conversation about what's going on in Baltimore, not with what was going on in terms of the violent or nonviolent protests, but moreover, Freddie Gray, right?
Right.
So Curtis Mayfield's right. Freddie's dead.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I find interesting about how Curtis Mayfield was articulating the story of a brother named Freddie, who happened to be a victim of substance abuse and addiction, is that he was talking about how people were trying to distance themselves from Freddie. That he was a social and political outcast. You talk about this being the lepers show, right? So lepers in biblical times, social political outcasts. I'll actually be preaching about that tomorrow.
All right.
But I found that even, you ask someone about the black community too. In the black community, a lot of times what happens is when there are instances whereby people in the black community act contrary to people who in certain privileged spaces within the black community want them to act, we try to distance ourselves from them.
Definitely.
So we have a president who I'm loving and dearly respecting, but at the same time, he's calling people who are violently protesting thugs because of their behavior.
Right.
Well, I wonder if he would call some of his political comrades thugs who vote for wars that loot lands like Iraq and Iran, or at least I know we want some of the stuff in Iran, or other places in the Middle East. Or, we have presidents who has dropped more drones than his predecessor did, So it's interesting to see how this shapes out in terms of black community as a separate entity, but also black community within the broader environment of the American community at large. So it's a lot of things that we could be talking about in that regard.
What is America failing to hear from those individuals who are rioting?
Yeah, so I think that's a spinoff of the Dr. King quote that riots are the voice or the language of the unheard.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think America. I'm not sure that we're not hearing. I think they hear it. They just don't give it. They don't really care. I had to remember I was on the AM station.
On CBS radio.
Yeah.
Talk radio.
That's Howard Stern.
That is Matthew.
No.
No, absolutely not. So I think it's heard because part of this is structural, which means it seems as though, and studies have shown us, that the system has been orchestrated in such a way to produce this type of segregation and exploitation of especially poor and working class black people. So now that the system is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, when the people who have been most negatively affected by the system start to revolt and respond against the system, then we participate in what Malcolm X would call blaming the victim, right? So now the media is portraying it such that you rooting for the people who are the oppressors and then mad at the people who are oppressed, right? Why they burning? Why they look? But one of the council members of Baltimore said this early on, and I also want to point to something that you said about the way that Freddie Gray was transported too. One of the council members said that there were parts of Baltimore that look the same today as they did after the '68 riots.
Right. They didn't go back and rebuild it.
Right. But earlier this week, the earthquake took place in Nepal, and the next day we appropriated $1 million to Nepal, right? The next day after that, a lot of people don't know this, John Kerry went and had a meeting with somebody, so they upped it from $1 million to $10 million. Now, I love all of God's children. So I am not objecting to the fact that we provide aid to other countries.
Yeah.
But when you can provide $10 million to Nepal in 3 days and not give the type of money that's needed to restore a major American city over 40 years after a riot, then that talks about not that we're not being heard, but people just don't care about what we're saying.
Well, I believe that there's a cause and effect for everything. And David and I, we had a conversation on the way down here. We talked about neglect in the inner city and in these types of neighborhoods that's predominantly occupied by minority people and the poor people. And then we want to go back, let's go back something, because you were talking about Curtis Mayfield. Well, let's go back in the 70s when Freddie died and dead. the movement that happened in the 60s. We had civil rights movement, and there was a lot of conversation about black people moving forward and being progressive, educating, being proud of who you are. James Brown coming out and all of that, and then you had King and marches and people. The civil rights law was passed and all these things in 1964, and then you had Dr. King was assassinated in '68. And if you kill the dream, then the people will stop.
If you kill a dreamer, then the dream is supposed to die too.
Exactly. So what happened in the 70s, you had the drugs. They came in and they infiltrated the neighborhoods. And then crack cocaine surfaced. And then marijuana surfaced. And then heroin surfaced, where those were drugs that poor people couldn't afford. But here it comes now, especially cocaine. Now you got this crack thing going from coast to coast. And it just tore up a whole generation of people. And then as a product of these people from the 70s, they producing all these kids, fatherless kids, because now you got black men being incarcerated. There's an enormously high rate because Reagan and passed the drug law. Just say no. And they had that big movement, and then the sentence structures changed for these small types of cases. You can have
Reagan also signed the Iran-Contra stuff too.
Exactly. Well, we know I didn't want to get into the conspiracy of how that stuff got here.
Well, I'll take it off you. Jay-Z said blame Oliver North because I ran Contra. I ran contraband that they sponsored before this rhyming stuff. We was in concert.
Definitely. If you watch the documentary of the freeway gang in California, how they work with the government to get this stuff in these neighborhoods. So I believe that. And then what happened, you have a byproduct of that conspiracy by the conspirators, and now these children, the Generation X, the Generation Y, are this byproduct of the crack babies that's coming up now. They're 16, 17, 21, 25, right around there. And then they have no father, no teachers. All of the things that I grew up with is gone. Big Mama not around no more. You know, they don't get homemade biscuits and these types of meals and things like that. And now you have the babies having babies, raising the babies. But what happened, the conspirators, I believe, never factored in that their children would also be drawn in to the hip hop,
to the lifestyle,
exactly,
that they perpetuate on television.
Exactly.
Yeah, but they also, you know, those hyper privileged communities have ways to buffer when their kids fall into, you know, like for instance, the brother who was under the influence of something, killed a girl with his car, and then the lawyer argued affluenza. I don't know if y'all heard about this. I mean, it's really something to look at. I mean, they just like made up a sickness, and the sickness was simply he got too much money. His family got too much money, right? I will push back a little bit, because I think, some of the contemporary circumstances that we encounter are a lot more complex than just there's no dads in the home. We product of drug deals and drug infestation in our communities, which is true, but I think it's a little bit more complex than that. And part of the irony is this: as we talk about LGBTQ rights and the reframing or restructuring of the nuclear family, right? I mean, if we're going to say that we can believe people to be raised properly without having the traditionalized family as the infrastructure, then we have to carry that across the board. We can't say the reason that is going wrong for this particular group now is because people aren't growing up in these traditionalized family structures. Nevertheless, I think one of the things that did begin to happen with the civil rights movement is that there was a particular type of framing of what type of Negroes people in the mainstream would be willing to put up with. So the retelling of what happened during the civil rights movement has been conflated to where it's only really the moderate Negroes that get a lot of cachet and notoriety. But part of the reason people were willing to listen to King as much as they did, and they really didn't like him in the years that they killed him, even the black community.
We know.
They really didn't like him. But the people who were, like, let's just say white moderates, white liberals, the reason they were willing to listen to him, because on the alternative is, who you going to listen to, King or Malcolm X? Right? So in some ways, this Black Power revolutionary and radicalism, if you will, has worked in concert with some of the more moderate and moderate civil rights type of efforts and strategies and stuff like that too. So it's a very complex thing that we need to provide some complex dialogue and some complex answers to, and not just say, oh, well, if you just gave them jobs, which we do need jobs, or if you just put black men back in the home, which, you know, you would hope that black men would be responsible as it relates to their parental responsibilities and stuff like that.